Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, February 5th, 2022. I almost forgot what day it was for just a second. In today's video, we're going to be talking about a race that definitely deserves a bit more of close attention and close calculation as we enter into November. Taking a look at our multiple competitive Senate races in 2022, we traditionally only talk about the main ones that really make headway when it comes down to the mainstream media and in fundraising efforts on both party sides. Taking a look at states such as Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, North Carolina, and Georgia have become routine parts of our estimations and our predictions looking at the 2022 midterm elections. And often I characterize the state of Ohio, which, as you can tell from the title of this video, is going to be our center focus today, but I often characterize it as likely Republican, taking a look at its rating and pretty much how it has remained the exact same since the beginning of my 2022 election predictions. Many people write it off as an opportunity for the GOP to just remain in power and not really give the Democrats any chance at victory. But likely doesn't always mean safe. Some states have actually moved from likely into the safe column, states such as Iowa that have changed as a response to the incumbent announcing that they are running for re-election. Unfortunately for the Ohio GOP, they will not have their incumbent running for re-election, the same incumbent who in 2016 was able to win with over 20% more of the vote than the Democrat, the former governor at that, someone who had won a statewide election in the past in an election in which Donald Trump only won by about 8 points. And I say only won by about 8 points in comparison to this margin of victory, rather than more of an idea that, 8 points isn't a lot. In no way am I trying to say that there was not a substantial victory for Donald Trump, just more so that it was the fact that Rob Portman's victory was much more influential and much more impactful, to say the least. So looking at the Senate race in 2022, why is this a race to watch? If I truly haven't changed it from the beginning of my first time looking at the races in Ohio, why is this all of a sudden something that needs to have some type of concern for either party? And I would first say that while we generally know how this state is going to go, I think that it is very clear that the GOP has that advantage, which is why it hasn't changed tremendously. Looking at the most recent presidential election results, what you will find is that in the state of Ohio, you are looking at a state in which Donald Trump won by over 8 points in the 2020 election, despite Joe Biden doing better in many other Rust Belt states. Looking at the race here, the GOP has an opportunity to lose this Senate election. This is the Republican Party's race to lose. Rob Portman's victory in 2016 should have been a testament in itself that Democrats aren't really going to contest someone like Rob Portman. But the unfortunate reality for the GOP is that while they definitely could find someone in a similar way to Rob Portman would become very popular across the state, decimate in statewide elections against the Democratic Party, they actually are propping up someone who did run for Senate before and lost in 2012, ran in 2018, cited family issues as a means of not running, ended up divorcing his wife, having a lot of drama when it comes down to his family. I'm not one to speak on that because I don't think that is my business to really dive into, but it definitely was something that, got him out of the race in 2018 and now is no longer a hindrance for 2022. But looking at the Senate races in the state of Ohio, looking at this exact candidate, Josh Mandel has definitely taken a big step towards the right in terms of his partisanship, in terms of his extremism, and definitely is trying to replicate President Trump on almost every level, just going a bit too far. And I think Josh Mandel, out of all of these candidates, truly could make the race very competitive. I think that it is entirely possible for Josh Mandel to say something, that is not the right thing to say on the campaign trail that could result in the race becoming competitive. I think the Republicans take a big risk with nominating someone like Josh Mandel because not only is he a liability in this election, if he is to win the general election, let's say 2028 ends up being a good year for the Democratic Party, you might find that he is a liability further down the line. People might not necessarily like candidates who are not so politically correct. While the state of Ohio did vote for Donald Trump in both 2016 and 2020, they have elected Democrats in between that time frame. Even in 2018, what we found was that actually Ohio went to Sherrod Brown by a margin of about 6 percentage points against Jim Renacki. Taking a look at Josh Mandel's race in 2018, he actually was supposed to be that nominee, ran against Sherrod Brown in 2012, ended up losing that race here by a margin of about 5 percentage points when Joe Biden and Barack Obama were only able to win by about 3 points. Obviously, Barack Obama being at the head of the ticket, I only said Joe Biden first, just simply because I was associating it to the Obama administration. But the point is that Josh Mandel has lost statewide races before. Ohio does not shy away from electing Democrats in the way that you might expect. Republicans don't always perform as well in the state of Ohio as Donald Trump did, as Mike DeWine can tell you, with nearly losing the governor's race in the state of Ohio in 2018. So in looking at 2022, what Josh Mandel does in terms of his partisanship and in terms of his extremism, I mean, this guy is very much Donald Trump, but further to the right, which means he becomes his own person. Rather than take the positions of being, pro-vaccine, but maybe anti-mask mandate, Josh Mandel has definitely taken a bit more right-wing standpoints when it comes down to COVID-19. Not necessarily just right-wing standpoints, more so just questioning the legitimacy of it. Doing extreme things when it comes down to masks, flaunting the idea of burning masks when it comes down to what this actually means, and masks as a representation for mandates and things of that nature. I mean, Josh Mandel definitely takes some pretty extreme viewpoints, and he isn't actually the only GOP candidate that could in the future become a liability for the GOP. There's always the possibility that J.D. Vance or Jane Timken could make races competitive in the future if they take some positions in which they are not favored by the state. But the only person I really think would actually do that and really mess up, and in terms of where they are right now, definitely could be attacked in the general election based off many of their statements, is Josh Mandel. I think that what we might find is that the Ohio Senate race could turn into a similar race of one that we saw in 2012. Not necessarily in Ohio, but more so in the states of Missouri and Indiana. Todd Akin in the state of Richard Murdoch in Indiana, Todd Akin in the state of Missouri. I forgot the state name for just a moment. But what happened in Missouri was that Todd Akin was the more extreme GOP nominee, and out of her own political knowledge, decided to funnel money into Todd Akin's GOP primary campaign. And the reason why she did that was not because, the she I'm referring to is Claire McCaskill, the reason why she did that was not because she wanted a Republican to win. Obviously, as the incumbent United States Senator, you never want to lose your race. It's not all of a sudden that Claire McCaskill had some random epiphany that she was now supporting Republicans. Instead, she knew that Todd Akin would eventually do something on the campaign trail as the more extreme candidate, in fact, the most extreme on that GOP primary list, and that running against him in the general election with something like that would end up benefiting her. And she was absolutely correct. In the state of Indiana, the same thing happened. Not necessarily that Joe Donnelly propped up the right GOP nominee, but that the GOP nominee said something that was simply not favorable for their political standings, and they ended up losing in the Senate race on the same ballot in which Mitt Romney was able to win both Indiana and Missouri by larger margins than John McCain did in 2012. In fact, John McCain lost Indiana in 2008, yet the Senate race still went blue by 5 points. It was about a 15-point swing relative to the presidential margin in the Senate race there. Same thing. In fact, much more significant in the Senate race in Missouri in 2012. So 2022 could bring in Ohio as a race that ends up being more competitive that we might not necessarily have expected. Looking at many of these endorsements, one thing is very clear. There has not been a super major endorsement from either side. What you are going to find is that Donald Trump has not spoken on this race yet. I'm interested to see why, but it's entirely possible that he's deciding to hold on, later down the line to maybe make an endorsement closer to the primary season. It could just be the fact that he also has not made his own decision and simply doesn't know who he wants to support. Taking a look at all the primary data, what you will find is that the riskiest candidate here, Josh Mandel, ends up taking the lead in almost every single poll. The only person who seems to contest him in any way is this candidate named Mike Gibbons. Beyond that, the rest of the polls either show him ahead or tied with an individual candidate. There doesn't seem to be too much support for candidates like J.D. Vance or Jane Timken or Bernie Moreno, who actually just dropped out of the race, or Matt Dolan. Josh Mandel definitely seems to be taking the lead. And taking a look at the question about who will win the primary, looking at the numbers here, it looks like Josh Mandel still remains the favorite amongst the political betting odds. These aren't always accurate, but when people involve their money in politics, they tend to try to be correct and can sort of steer you in the right direction. Looking at the Democratic side, the reason why I would also say that Democrats might end up being in a competitive position here is because of their candidate, Tim Ryan, who won in a swing district multiple times. He comes from a district that is now not redistricted yet because we don't know the new Ohio map, but was an even congressional delegation. That was, even split for Democrats and Republicans, and yet Tim Ryan, as the Democrat, was able to win. Now, Tim Ryan isn't exactly the best GOP candidate that could have ran. I think that the best one could have been someone like Joyce Beatty or someone like Amy Acton, the former director of the Ohio Department of Health, who actually, taking a look at the primary data here in a hypothetical poll, defeated Tim Ryan despite him being a sitting incumbent and someone who had ran for president of the United States. But because the GOP, first of all, has a competitive primary and Democrats don't necessarily, this means that Democrats will have pretty much that upper hand when it comes down to the general election. They will have time to counteract the Republican Party. And looking at many of these endorsements, what you find is that it is very standard and some very big names. You have Ted Strickland, you have Sherrod Brown, you have Joyce Beatty, you have Marcy Kaptur. These are people who are electable in the state of Ohio who have been elected previously. You also have Hillary Clinton, which will help him amongst that centrist wing. You aren't really going to see some type of major primary opposition from the progressive left, primarily because Tim Ryan has already declared himself as the frontrunner and will remain that way. In addition to that, one thing that I do want to say is that it isn't just me who is expecting this race to potentially become competitive. Looking at the polls between Tim Ryan and Josh Mandel, and I really only would look at these polls in specific simply because both of these names are the most recognizable names across the state. Tim Ryan is someone who is known because of his presidential bid and the fact that he's a sitting incumbent in the House of Representatives. Josh Mandel has been on the ballot statewide in 2012 and nearly was in 2018. So him returning to Ohio politics really isn't new. But he defeats Tim Ryan by not necessarily the most resounding margins. Seeing Donald Trump's victory of 8%, then 8% between 2016 and 2020, I'm not super impressed by Josh Mandel's quote-unquote electability. I think that these margins of victories here are actually pretty narrow. Now, Tim Ryan defeats some of the other GOP nominees, but I would caution this by saying that Josh Mandel is the most recognizable names. In terms of Tim Ryan's percentages, he doesn't really see any type of major improvement against these other GOP candidates. It's more so that these GOP candidates aren't able to win a significant portion of the vote, most likely because they are not recognizable names. I do think that as we get closer to the general election, you will find that there will be, more concrete numbers because people will know who the nominees are. But I think this is definitely a race that cannot be ignored. And my likely Republican characterization actually isn't with the rest of the characterizations when it comes down to, matching them back and forth. The Cook Political Report and Real Clear Politics both characterize Ohio as a lean Republican seat. Sabato's Crystal Ball keeps it where I am at likely Republican, and Inside Elections keeps it at solid Republican. Now, I would say that Real Clear Politics, I don't necessarily believe is the best pollster or best organization for ratings. They have some states such as Oregon that in the presidential election were rated as lean Democrat, which really didn't make any sense. But the Cook Political Report is a very much respected institution, and I would also take in their rating here in heavy consideration. Now, Sabato's Crystal Ball was the most accurate group back in the 2020 election, and they rank it as likely Republican. I think that is a fair characterization, but the fact that it's not solid R means that it definitely could narrow down. You see, had Rob Portman been running again, it would have been a solid R, rating every single time you went through the rankings from Inside Elections, Sabato's Crystal Ball, and things of that nature. Looking at the predictions from 2016, Cook Political Report was a bit off. They said lean Republican. That never really made any sense. But Sabato's Crystal Ball said safe R. Rothenberg said likely R. Daily KOS said safe R. Even a Real Clear Politics, which now rates the race as lean Republican, rated it as safe Republican back in 2016. I think it became very clear by the end of it that there was not going to be a major victory for the Democrats in Ohio. Earlier on, it was a possibility. In fact, early polling data had the Democrats ahead pretty consistently until 2016 hit. That's when you saw Ted Strickland really fall off the face of the planet. You saw that his campaign, as said by his own campaign managers and people on the inside, that this was one of the worst campaigns Strickland had ever ran in the state of Ohio. And it was just that momentum was building up to the final stretch of the campaign, where in the final few weeks, instead of being down at 38%, as he was earlier on, 40%, 42%, Rob Portman was consistently polling 57, 56, 57, 58, 52, 58. And that's when it became very consistent and very clear that the winner of the state of Ohio was going to win by a super substantial margin. And that's exactly what happened. But in the polling data right now, all we're seeing is a 4-point race, which actually means that it's less than likely when it comes down by margin, which means I could be wrong about this estimation and underestimating the Democratic Party. Now, I will say that I don't think Josh Mandel will be, screwing himself over pretty dramatically. I think that the Republicans, as seen in my most recent projection, are definitely favored to win the state of Ohio. But it's not out of the question to see the Democrats end up in a position where Ohio is now competitive. That's because the GOP has really everything in their court, which means it is their race to lose. But they've done things like this in the past and have made it so it is near impossible for them to win some Senate races. Again, I don't think Josh Mandel will do it, but it's not out of possibility, which is why I would say closely watch this race. It also becomes a point that if the 2022 midterms do end up taking a turn in favor of the Democratic Party, then maybe we could see a margin like the governor's race in Ohio in 2018. Not a Democratic victory, but not a resounding defeat. You're talking about maybe a 3 to 4 point victory at most for Josh Mandel if Democrats have another type of wave year. That is obviously, something that is so unlikely at this point in time. The Republicans are taking major advancements when it comes down to the generic ballot. Joe Biden is simply so unpopular across the nation. But crazier things have happened in American politics, and I wouldn't write anything off until we actually get around to the later months of this year, once we get closer to the November election. So as we move through the next couple months, as we get through this Republican primary, this Democratic primary in the state of Ohio, we are going to look at some of these primaries and see who ends up winning them and what that means for the general election. I think that all these candidates could potentially become a liability in the future, as most politicians would, but one in particular really strikes out, and that is Josh Mandel. He has taken some very extremist, beliefs and stances as of recent, and I think that's something that the GOP should consider when it comes down to the primary. While he may be able to win in 2022 in a red wave year, if he's the incumbent in 2028 and Democrats have some type of advantage at that point in time, it is entirely possible that the Democratic Party does end up winning in the state of Ohio, primarily because Josh Mandel, had he been, another Republican there, but if he is in that position, could become a liability and thus hand a Senate seat in the future or now to the Democratic Party. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.